Jean. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you today about this great project that you all are participating in. So what I wanted to do is just give you today a little bit of a setting and a background for the development of protection plans. What does that mean? Why are we working in the Natchaug River watershed? And what is the Connecticut DEEP part of this project? I've been working with a group of folks, and Rebecca Jascott, who's on the call today, is my project manager for this, and she is being ably assisted by both Jeff Gill and Sarah Hurley, who are two scientists in our group. So as I said, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on what a protection plan is, some preliminary results of our watershed analysis, identify how that relates to the implementation work that Jean is doing, and then give you the bigger picture of what does it take to move from today to a plan that is complete. So, water quality protection. For those of you who have been working in environmental protection and environmental quality for a while, then you're probably familiar with reports that are oftentimes focused on restoring waters that are impaired, waters that have received too much pollution, too much impact. Very valuable to do that, but there's also a significant value in working in waters that have healthy aquatic and wildlife populations where water quality is excellent and where environmental quality is excellent. Because when we put time into those watersheds to maintain them at that condition, then everyone benefits, both the communities that live in and use the resources, but also the ecological populations. So a number of years ago, states and EPA came together in recognition of that, that goal to protect good water quality, and both an EPA Healthy Watersheds program and the EPA 303D or TMDL program identified the goals of protecting healthy waters as something that the program should strive for. Additionally, we went out to the citizens of Connecticut a number of years ago and asked them, where do you want us to do plans and what type of plans do you want us to do? And there was a very strong sentiment from the citizens that they would like us to spend some of our resources on protecting waters with good water quality. Now that brought us to here. So water quality protection plans are still fairly new. This one in the Natchaug is the first one in the state of Connecticut. And while some other states are working on protection plans, again, it's not an established protocol, so we're all kind of trying to navigate the best way to do this. So in many ways, not only is the protection plan that you're working on here going to be something that guides other communities in Connecticut, it's something that I'm going to share with my partners across the country so they can see one approach to setting a protection for important watersheds, and that might help them in doing the same thing in their states. What we've been working on relative to protection plans is looking at a two-part plan. The first part being a water quality evaluation, where we do a deep dive into the watershed and we look at and document existing conditions in water quality from a wide range of data and inputs. And I'll go through that with you in a little bit so you can kind of see the level of effort there. The goal of that evaluation is to eventually determine what are the pressures or stressors on the watershed that, if we don't pay attention to them, could lead in the future to an impact on water quality and environmental quality. So that's kind of the goal of the first part of the document. And then the second part is to take those stressors and develop implementation plans and strategies that could be adopted by the communities so that you could get some boots on the ground to actually implement actions to physically protect those waters. So that's the structure that we're working on. And Jean is doing a great job on pretty much everything, but the focus right now for today in her presentation is on the planning for implementation. We did a presentation in December that gave Jean and the community the initial identification of the potential pressures and stressors on the water quality that informed this action. So why the Natchaug River watershed? Several things came together because there were a few watersheds we evaluated statewide for where a water quality protection plan would be appropriate. The Natchaug quickly came to the top because of the strength of the healthy ecological communities and good water quality. We had a lot of good data. Obviously, there was low environmental stress. There's pressures on this watershed, but they're at a level that can be managed. But I think the real key here was the strong local partnerships and the interest in protecting water quality within the communities. We can write at DEEP, we can write plans until the cows come home, and if they just go on a shelf and nobody works to implement them, then they're not as valuable as when we get to partner with communities that are ready and willing and interested in doing something to protect the environment in their area. So given all that, we felt there was a very strong potential for success for water quality protection. The 319 program echoed that by awarding a grant for this project, and so we all dove in together to start our protection planning on the Natchaug River and watershed. So what is it that Connecticut's doing relative to our part of the document? So again, we're looking at the watershed, large effort to gather data from any source we can find so that we can analyze it and identify these pressures on the watershed. And we're looking at watershed characteristics, ecological quality, the pressures, and the beneficial uses within the watershed, so that we can inform implementation activities. Because if you're going to spend the time and the money and the resources to do implementation, you want to have a sense that what you're doing is going to provide benefit. So we took several approaches to doing that evaluation. A lot of it was GIS. We looked at a lot of data sets and looking at activities and conditions and where they were located within the watershed. And GIS is a great platform to be able to look at data, but also to position the data so you can look at relationships between different things. We looked at water chemistry, we looked at biology, lots of information that went into this evaluation of pressures, excuse me, or stressors. So I'm going to just go through some of the, excuse me, data sets that, that we used. We are in the process of writing up this document right now. So we've given the public and Jean, basically, we led with the conclusions back in December. We're writing up the document. It's about to go to internal review. So you're going to see this, our part of the document, later on this fall, and you'll get a chance to get a deep dive into each of these. But we are looking at watershed characteristics, like how the water moves both underground and in our rivers and streams. We're looking at geology, soil characteristics, how the floodplain works, what type of land use is in the floodplains, what type of land use is in the riparian areas. And we have a lot of data and maps and all to try and bring that forward. We're looking at ecological quality, the biology in the stream, what's, based on actual monitoring of the fish and the invertebrates and the diatoms and periphyton, to see, exactly where they were measured and how healthy they are. Stream temperature, water quality, you can see the list here, flow, habitat continuity. So we're trying to cast a broad net to get a picture of the ecological quality within the Natchaug. We also want to focus on the beneficial uses within the watershed, because even though, it may not, there's a relationship between these uses and good water quality. You're going to have more fishing and hunting and camping and hiking and use of your watershed if the water quality is good. And then, as you know, we have drinking water uses and a lot of protected land. So we're looking at that because we want to be able to also look at how either those uses contribute pressures or how pressures could affect those uses. And then finally, we bring it together with other potential sources for impact. So we're looking at things that are physical, like dams and culverts and things that interrupt the continuity of the water bodies. But we're also looking at things like impervious cover, which is hard surfaces within the watershed. When it rains on a hard surface, the water doesn't infiltrate, it transitions fairly directly to the water bodies and brings both pollutants, flashing, higher flows, increases in temperature. So there's an impact there. And the impact of stormwater is often measured by impervious cover and how close that impervious cover is to the water bodies. We're looking at agricultural practices and then more traditional sites like landfills or potential for cleanup or remediation sites and their potential impact on the watershed. For the water quality analysis, we've looked pretty broadly at both general parameters like solids and water chemistry, pH, but we're looking at nutrients and metals, and we're looking at patterns under wet and dry conditions to understand the impact of these within the watershed. Now, the levels of these parameters in the watershed are generally very good because we know that you have good water quality. But that said, they can still inform us about where the pressures are on the watershed. For example, does the concentration of nutrients in the watershed increase as you move from the upper part of one of the watersheds down to the lower part of the watershed? Do you see more nutrients in the streams under wet conditions compared to dry conditions? All that type of analysis helps identify different pressures and where they might be within the watershed. So that's a really quick summary of the types of information that we're analyzing. And then again, to kind of jump to the conclusions without giving you all the details behind it, what we're seeing is that there are multiple stressors within each watershed, and we're looking at not only the water, the whole Natchaug as a whole, but the various sub-watersheds that were on some of the maps that I showed you. What that tells us is focusing on one stressor is not necessarily the best way to provide protection throughout the watershed, and that we're recommending a flexible approach to apply a variety of means to protect the watershed. I think the sum of the parts is really where you're going to be most successful within the Natchaug. And we would probably divide these different stressors into two main categories: stressors or pressures that affect the physical habitat and those that affect water quality. And to kind of tie those into implementation that Jean's going to talk more about, things that you might consider to address risk to habitat are things like any activity that actually prevents an impact or a physical degradation of habitat, protecting and enhancing open space, and providing that continuity so wildlife have corridors where they can move, or fish have corridors they can move, managing the hard surfaces in the watershed, and really looking hard at land uses closer to the streams and in buffers and in floodplains. Similarly, there are strategies you can evaluate to prevent risks to water quality, evaluating how you're managing stormwater, and evaluating the practices on agricultural areas to make sure that they're minimizing releases of nutrients or solids and such. Managing septic systems. Septic systems are a real big deal throughout this watershed, so looking and making sure that those are healthy. And then obviously you have a lot of really great stream for cold water fish like trout. So managing impacts to stream temperature, which in many cases gets back to managing land use and tree cover, but also managing stormwater. So these are just some of the things, and Jean's going to do a deep dive into various opportunities. So back to the plan. So we're writing up the first part, the water quality evaluation. As I said, we gave a presentation in December that went into more detail than what I just did. But our draft document is in preparation. I expect it to get to internal review in DEEP pretty quickly. Jean is working on the watershed planning for implementation. That's what she has a grant for. And she's doing a great job in wrapping that up, reaching out to you guys to figure out what the community goals are for water quality. And today she's going to talk in detail about various implementation activities she's identified that you might be able to support throughout the watershed. So to get to a final document for protecting the Natchaug watershed, first step is to everybody to listen to Jean and to review the documents and get her comments. She needs to finalize her implementation recommendations and revise her half of the document by the end of September. And then we're going to put at DEEP, we're going to complete our draft of the first half of the document, the water quality analysis. And then we will, when Jean's document is done, we will blend both halves together to form one document. Once we have one document together, we're going to come back out to you and hold another public meeting and comment period later on in the fall on that blended document. And then we'll take comments on that, make revisions as appropriate, and then we will submit that final revised document to EPA for their review and acceptance. So contact information for me and for Rebecca, and also for Eric Thomas, who I'm sure you all know is a great resource and advocate for environmental quality in this part of the state. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.